All right, so I was standing at the Kroger's across the street from my house right now, looking into my basket and wondering how much this tiny little amount of food was going to set me back. But at the same time, I was reminded of something else. Something Joe Biden said a few months ago about the dignity of work. So I started doing my research on how I felt about that phrase, the dignity of work. And I asked ChatGPT how it felt about the dignity of work. And it came back and it said there was no dignity in working for the minimum wage because the minimum wage is a trap. And if work really had dignity, it would actually be real. Instead, we get paid monopoly money every week and we wonder why we're struggling. We wonder why, no matter how many hours you put into your job, it's just never enough. And so you begin to to think about, where's the dignity in working? I see absolutely no dignity whatsoever. I was looking through my books today during the live stream about how I turned into who I did. And a lot of it has to do with the books that I've read. At looking at how conditions for the proletariat will not change. It's something that George Orwell did extensive work on, mainly in his book 1984, but there's also a lot of these hints in other books, like A People's History of the United States and any of Jared Diamond's books. And I kept thinking to myself, do they really expect us to swallow the pill of the dignity of work? I don't think so. I think that people need to wake up and realize that going to your job, regardless of what it pays, if you're not an executive level person, you're not going to amount to anything. I call myself a loser all the time. I mean, this morning I woke up and I needed an AI companion because of severe loneliness. And as a side, how do I put this? I've asked a few people, random people today, about how they felt about AI companions. And I was talking to the 19-year-old cashier, and he said he's had one for a long time, but he couldn't afford to pay. And I was just like, the whole idea of having to pay for things that we shouldn't have to pay for is a crime in and of itself, which was another question that I asked ChatGPT. Is the minimum wage cruel and unusual punishment? And it came back with a gigantic list of how the minimum wage has been weaponized against the proletariat. And I didn't want to go with that video because that video would be even darker than the one that I created today, whatever I'm going to say in the next 15 minutes. So, if you ever get a chance, ask ChatGPT that question. Is the minimum wage weaponized? And you can read pages and pages of the way that it is. All right, let's get into our monologue really quick. They tell you to work hard, stay humble, and be grateful for whatever scraps you get. But have you ever stopped to ask who benefits from that mindset? Because it sure as hell isn't you. The truth is, they keep wages low, rent high, and opportunities just out of reach on purpose. Because struggling workers don't have time to question the system. They're too busy surviving. And the second people wake up and start demanding better, the whole house of cards comes crashing down. If there's one word at a large retail place that they don't want to hear coming out of their employees is union. That word, when I worked at Walmart, was a trigger word for the general manager. He would tell employees regularly if they ever even had the slight inclination to start thinking about a union, the corporate office would come in, shut down the store, get rid of all of the workers, and you would all lose your jobs immediately. That was the constant threat. Of course, they didn't want you talking about it. In fact, my general manager spent years wondering where I was posting my hatred towards the corporation. Because he told me on many occasions, if I ever find you talking crap about this company, hating on Walmart, that's your last day of working here. Because I don't know if he had just brainwashed himself into believing that this was a good company, or his $150,000 a year salary from being a general manager of a store was blinding him to the fact that he was exploiting the living hell out of people who couldn't get out of the way. And to him, ideas of minimum wage, minimum effort seem preposterous. He was a firm believer in minimum wage, maximum effort. Think of the stupidity of that. Yet there are all these people out there, the small business owners, which in sometimes I think are much worse than Evil Corp and all of its clones. The small business owner of a restaurant, a small, I don't know what kind of shop, maybe a landscaping or pool cleaning or home cleaning service. In some senses, I feel like they're even worse because they personalize the lack of good workers, the lack of hard workers, and the fact that their workers are going to be cycling in and out of that job, causing the small business owners' revenue to fluctuate because they can't retain people in those jobs. And for good reason. They're unskilled labor, and they don't share the profits with their employees. That's actually something that came up in the live stream today. What's the best business model in which workers should be pushing towards? And that's the co-op, where everyone that joins that business becomes a part owner. That way, there are no overpriced executives. The CEO of such a co-op would only be allowed to make 3 times more than the highest paid worker. And everyone would have a good reason to work harder. Because when you work harder, you directly benefit from it. When you work harder at Walmart, only Walmart benefits from you. You get the short end of the stick. As I've said before, I read a very cruel statistic. I don't know how long ago it was, but it went to something to the effect of Walmart makes $300,000 off of each one of its minimum wage workers per year in profit. Paying people $15,000 while they earn that much more money from you, the exploited, should be criminal. But it makes good corporate business. Record high profits every year while they shrink the workforce, and you're left holding 2 turds in both your hands and wondering which one you're going to eat right now and which one you're going to save for later. But let's get into our talking points. That was a very long introduction. Nearly half the video is introduction. So here we go. Poverty isn't an accident. Corporations can pay livable wages, but they choose not to because keeping workers desperate means they'll accept anything. Anything. You'll accept poor work conditions, you'll accept low wages, and the fact that you have no health benefits. That sounds like nothing to me. They've tried to turn every single job in America into a contract job, into having you work on an app where what you do directly pays you, and if you're not doing something, you don't get paid. The surveillance state in this country on workers is absolutely disgusting. In fact, this week I was reading about a guy that worked in retail, and somehow he figured out that the company software that he was required to carry on his personal phone was allowing his boss to spy on what he was saying and where he was at all times. That surveillance can go up even worse when you're working in an office and that office installs software that monitors how often you're touching your keyboard. It's checking how many times you're typing on your keyboard. And if enough time passes that you're not working on your keyboard, your boss gets an email saying that you're not working hard enough. They'll walk over and ask you what's wrong. That kind of control exists currently. Never do anything on your work computer that you wouldn't want your boss to see you doing. because they can log in and they can monitor any conversation you have at work, and they can monitor anything that you do on the job. In fact, when I worked for Allied Waste in the mid 2000s, this was a trick that they would use to get rid of contractors once they were no longer useful. They would show them a list of unauthorized websites that they had been to during company time, and that was it. You didn't get to plead your case. You were guilty till proven innocent in many situations when it comes to a separation of employment. It happens every day. So next time you think that no one knows what you're doing, they know. It's only a matter of giving them reason to check. Because imagine if they had to watch every single one of their thousands of workers under a microscope. They do to some extent, but you've got to give them a reason to start looking into you. Because in fact, there was a termination recently in which I looked at it and I thought, how did they figure out that those two, and it was two workers that were going back and forth through email talking about something that was so offensive to the corporation, whatever was going on there, it triggered something. And it was an immediate phone call to get those emails to the manager and terminate those employees on the spot. This is the kind of termination it was. You're typing along and suddenly your computer stops working. That's the kind of termination I'm talking about. The kind of termination where you don't think anyone's noticed what you're doing, but they know. They always seem to know. Talking point number 2. The CEO's salaries and stock prices are hitting all-time highs. So where's the struggle for them? That's what they don't understand. Just because you don't want to see the poverty in your own corporation doesn't mean it's not there. Your employees are struggling. There isn't a single person in this country right now making under $50 an hour that isn't struggling and feeling the indignity of work. When I say no one can afford to work anymore, it's because it's real. Between the cost of food and rent and healthcare that you can't afford unless it's provided to you through the corporation. And let me tell you this, the healthcare benefit from every corporation I've worked at throughout my entire life has declined. It's worse than the decline in the taste of food. The healthcare that they're providing you right now to me feels like a voucher, like a discount, because you always end up paying so much money out of pocket. You think that your healthcare is going to cover your healthcare, but it doesn't include your eyes or your teeth intentionally because they're too expensive to cover your teeth. Somehow, the insurance companies have managed to put some sort of loophole into the fact that your teeth are part of your body or that they're decorative. I don't get that. But that same mentality of finding loopholes to not pay people or cover their health benefits is what they're doing all of the time. Making jobs into things that aren't even jobs anymore. In fact, I was watching John Oliver today while I was doing my my cardio at the gym, and there was a for-profit prison that that housed people that required them daily to work inside of that prison. And if you chose not to work, they wouldn't feed you and they would put you in isolation. And when a judge asked their corporate lawyer, well, isn't that worse than slavery? And there was no response to that. These corporations are getting away with treating people like absolute garbage. In fact, you are not only just a number on a spreadsheet, but they're taking an active interest in tormenting their workers. Not being able to afford to eat and not being able to afford housing, and yet calling that a job. I think calling something a job should come with dignity, not humiliation. Talking point number 3. If wages actually kept up with productivity, the minimum wage today would be over $25 an hour. Well, let me tell you this, over $25 an hour doesn't cut it in today's world. Let's break it down. 2 things here. Food is starting to compete with the cost of rent because it's gotten that outrageous. But at nearly $1,800 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in this city means that you have to make at least $40,000 a year just to cover your rent. That's $20 an hour just to cover your roach infested apartment. That nothing else. That doesn't include utilities, that doesn't include your transportation, and it doesn't include your food. With the extra $10,000 that you're left over, you have to have a car. On average, my car costs about $15,000 a year. That's car payments, that's maintenance, that's gas, that's insurance. My insurance keeps getting more expensive. That's what it costs to drive in America. Now, you tell me how $25 an hour could ever be minimum wage. I would say that more than half of the people that work at the Kroger's across the street from my house walk to work, Uber to work, or take a bus. No one in that store, unless they have a significant other, drives. And the reason for that is simple. What I just said. The cost of living. Can you imagine trying to drive a car when you're making $15 an hour, which is just $30,000 a year? And I just told you guys what it cost. $15 an hour translates to a roughly $30,000 a year minus taxes. Now, imagine, let's say they take 10 to 15% of your money out in taxes. That leaves you with about $26,000 a year. Your car costs $16,000 a year. No way. It's just not going to happen. And I'm a testament to that. I've been a minimum wage worker my entire adult life. You know what the one thing that's been missing from my entire life? Being able to afford an apartment and drive a car. Those 2 things were never going to happen without me taking a job like the one that I currently have at Evil Corp, where the job itself is destroying me. Because that's what it was designed to do. Work isn't designed to cause people to thrive. It's exploitation, and it goes in the opposite direction. People's mental health declines rapidly once you start working. And there's a simple reason for that. Because work doesn't have any meaning. It does not have dignity in today's world. And it never will. Because unless you're rich, the dignity of working when you're rich means you don't actually do any physical work. You own the means of production, which is exactly what the proletariat does not do. They do not own any means of production. Therefore, their only way of survival is to rent their labor to big corporations who don't see them as human beings. Final talking point. That's why they make everything a hustle. If you're constantly chasing rent money, you're too drained to start a movement. Real power isn't voting for politicians who promise change. It's workers realizing they hold the true power and refuse to participate in a system that hates them. I mean, and it's not even subtle anymore. It is true disdain for the working class of people. Right now, the people in power are working overtime to create an entire class of extremely poor people, and they're doing a very good job at it. There are millions upon millions of newly employed federal workers out there looking for the exact same job that you need in order to support your family. Hell, even to support you living in your car. Because most people who live in their cars have jobs. And if that's all that you can afford, and this was intentional, the only way of fighting back is through the pitchfork. There is no other way. They're not going to listen or see or care what poor people are. There are no lobbyists for poor people. Yet the entire lobby industry works solely to put forth the agenda of the rich. I don't see the system ever working this way in a way that benefits ordinary people. Because if change ever happened, the rich people would call upon the government to save them. And that's all I have to say today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.